right. Dear friends, I have the impossible job of asking you all to please be seated. What a great gathering. The decibel level reflects how good it is to get together today. Thank you so much for coming. We are honored to welcome you here on behalf of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And if you're handing out any campaign contributions, hold off for a few minutes here. Yep. Our Attorney General has a handful of subpoenas for those who are not seated in the next 30 seconds. And more behind that. This is a tough crowd. That's why we have tough subpoenas and a tough Attorney General. There's lots of opportunities to visit. Those business cards can fly when we're done here, but we have lots to get through here. Whew. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on this day. In Utah, we call this just a normal, beautiful spring day. For those of you from Washington, D.C., it's like this every April. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Lou Kramer. I'm the CEO of Colliers International Utah and also have the pleasure of serving as the Utah co-chairman of our alliance, of the Utah Advisory Committee. It's my honor, together with former Congressman McAdams, to welcome you to a critical and timely conversation about the global threats and opportunities facing our country right now and what America's role in the world is going to be. And former Congressman Jim Matheson cannot be with us today. He's the co-chair of the Utah Advisory Council, but we're delighted to have a true champion, Congressman Blake Moore, here as our keynote speaker, and I thank the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for making this possible. It is a great organization I've had the pleasure of being associated with for many years from my days in Washington, D.C. And the U.S. Global Leadership Council has assembled a powerful group of leaders from around the state to form this advisory council. We are Republicans, Democrats, Independents, not all in the same person, but all of us together. Pillars of the business community, humanitarians, education leaders, business and civic and military veterans. And we have arrived at the same conclusion. America must continue to be a global leader. As a military veteran myself, and having had the honor of serving in the Reagan White House, focusing on international issues, I am totally committed to ensuring that America remains that, quote, shining city on the hill that President Reagan often referred to, because America is truly the one indispensable nation in this troubled world. And as Congressman McAdams knows, there are issues that affect all Americans. Together, we hope that these dynamic conversations today will help us to personally continue to talk with our friends and neighbors and discuss what we learned about America's role in the world so that we can continue to use the support of soft power, smart power to fulfill this major commitment we have for the rest of the planet. Quoting President Reagan again, freedom isn't free. It must be continually earned by every succeeding generation. We look forward to learning more about this, and I'm honored to welcome a true patriot and a devoted public servant, Congressman McAdams, to say more. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lou Kramer. And you always know if you're in the same room that Lou's in, you're probably doing something that's important and meaningful, and it's the right place to be. So thank you, Lou. It's great to be with you. Let me just start by saying thanks to the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for the incredible work that they do. I first connected to this organization when I was mayor. And I remember the outreach, and I remember thinking, I'm just the mayor of Salt Lake County. Why does the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition care about local government? For those of you in state and local elected office here today, I hope you have the answer to that question, as I soon learned as well, that so much of the U.S. leadership on the global stage starts with our states and our local governments. This is where trade, where our commerce, where diplomacy and exchanges happen, and where relationships are built that are important to the U.S. continued leadership on the global stage. So thank you to the state and local elected officials who are with us here today. Let me also thank Congressman Moore for taking the time to be with us. United States Congressman representing Utah's 1st Congressional District. I've known Congressman Moore for many years from my time in public service, and I don't want to hurt him by saying too many good things about him as one of the Democrats. As Lou said, we're Democrats, and I think maybe you should make that singular, Democrat, Republicans, and Independents. But let me thank Congressman Moore. After he won his primary and became the Republican nominee for United States Congress, he reached out and asked for my thoughts on, I was a serving congressman at the time, wanted to talk about what the job would be like and what to expect. And I'm happy to say I told him that he made the worst mistake of his life, and it was going to be an awful job, and I thanked him for his service. And we had a long conversation about what to expect and managing a public service with a young family. And I just want to say we know the sacrifices that you make, that your wife Jane makes, and that your kids make for your public service to our country, and we're thankful for your service. Now, we are all here together today as Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, but we're here because we know that party affiliation ends at the border. Outside of the United States, we are not Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. We are Americans. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman McAdams and Lou, for kicking us off today. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, please do eat. This is meant to be sort of a working luncheon. And so please do enjoy your meal. And I have to say, it is truly a delight to be in Utah, even in a snowstorm. I came out from Washington, D.C., as Lou said, but I'm a farm girl from Iowa. So I have to say, the thing I appreciate, I love it. I don't know if you're from Iowa, but you're getting it. Oh, yes. Okay. So 1 Democrat and 2 Iowans in the room, if you're keeping score, I guess, today, huh? But this is great. And we knew already when we saw the weather, I thought, this is Utah. I bet it's not really going to affect our numbers. I will say in Washington, D.C., this would shut down the city for probably 10 days. So thank you for your hardiness. Thanks for being here today. And again, I also want to thank Congressman Moore for being our special guest today. And I have to say, Utah is really lucky to have you, sir, as not only their representative, but I think the nation is as well, since you have been so strong and so good on the importance for the entire country of America being involved in global leadership. So thank you. And a special thanks, as you've just heard, from our bipartisan Utah Advisory Committee, and it's chaired by the Honorable Jim Matheson, whom all of you will know here, a former member of Congress, and of course Lou Kramer, who is the president and CEO of Colliers International and a former assistant secretary of commerce. And a big thanks to my colleague Luke Wentz. Most of you are here because you are friends of Luke. Luke oversees our Utah, of course, State Advisory Committee, and does such a fantastic job. And I'm just always delighted at a chance that I get to come to the state and meet with you all. So as has been mentioned, for those of you who might be new to USGLC, we are a really diverse, broad, bipartisan network. And we were really proud that a couple years ago, the Washington Post, in trying to sort of articulate who USGLC was, called it a unique bedfellows coalition and sort of left it with that. And so it's usually my job to kind of expound on that and tell you who we are. So we are a national bipartisan membership organization. Our coalition represents humanitarian organizations, the agriculture sector, veterans, the military sector, the national security sector, our faith-based organizations, our humanitarian organizations, as I said. And what brings us all together is that throughout our personal and professional affiliations, we recognize the importance of America's soft power tools, if you will, of diplomacy and development in our national security toolkit. And so if you look throughout the country in our wide membership, we have a year-long Next Gen Leadership Program, which I know some of you are past alumni of, to our Farmers for Prosperity Initiative, which was recently launched in our heartland. Our network really does span coast to coast, from Maine to Arizona, Texas to Michigan to right here in Utah. And that's what really makes this coalition so strong, is that we really recognize the vital sort of connection you all have to our issues. We're advised in our efforts by our bipartisan National Advisory Council. And this august group brings together foreign policy and national security luminaries, which includes to date almost every living former Secretary of State. We have former Secretaries of Defense and former congressmen and women. And they really are helpful in guiding sort of our look at what America's role in the world should be. But we're particularly proud of the support of the military community. And I want to thank so many of you here today who are serving or have served. We're so thankful for your service to our country. And really it's you, our military community, who really understands better than most and is such a powerful advocate for us, and why these soft power tools and approaches are so important, and what the linkages are between that development, diplomacy, and defense, and what it means for our national security. So today, we are advised by a National Security Advisory Council, which is co-chaired by Admiral James Stavridis and General Anthony Zinni. And it's also comprised of over 250 3- and 4-star generals, and they have been so impactful, and we'll be hearing a little bit later today from one of those NSAC members. We're also proud of our Veterans for Smart Power initiative. Right now across the country, we have more than 30,000 veterans who are part of this program, and they serve, again, as just such a powerful advocate for the work that we're doing. And simply put, what brings us together is this belief that America has to be involved in the world. And we truly believe that our strategic investments in diplomacy and development are essential to 3 things. 1, it protects our national security. 2, it advances our economic interests. And 3, it projects the very best of American values. At USGLC, you'll often hear us talk about this tiny 1% of the federal budget. Not everyone knows a lot about the international affairs budget. Those that do, when I'm going around the country speaking, usually think it gets much more funding than it does and does much different things than it actually does. But it represents less than 1% of our federal budget. But it has proven time and time again to be one of the most cost-effective and efficient uses of our taxpayer dollars. And why is that? Because we actually have a quantifiable return on the investment that this IAB has funded for us overseas. And so USGLC has started going around the country and asking the question, foreign assistance, foreign aid, what's it worth, right? And we want to understand what it's worth to everyone in every state, meeting them at the moment of where they are. And I'll be very honest with you, we think it's worth quite a lot. We look at it not as a handout, but as an investment. And we also recognize that what it's been worth is, frankly, the fact that all those investments we've made in supporting our allies across the world for more than 30 to 40 years, right now, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners are former recipients of USAID. That matters a lot, right? It matters a lot across the country, where 20% of our economy is built on trade. But if I look at Utah, right, in your global market, right, last year, $18.1 billion in goods were sold to foreign markets. More than 20% of all the jobs in your states are directly linked to global trade. So these investments mean a lot. We also know that it means a lot on our security and our stability front. Again, when we're talking to our NSEC and we're listening to our military community, I am always so impressed at the way they're able to articulate. And there's this famous quote that for every $1 you cut from the IAB, right, from that soft power funding, you're going to have to give the defense budget, you know, the Pentagon, about an extra $16. Because what that means is if we can't head off crisis and conflict, we're now going to be in the position of response. Response, and as General Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, will say, is much more expensive. And for every one of those dollars you cut, he's going to need about $16 more in bullets. But more than that, it's protecting the precious lives of our men and women in uniform who stand up every day to protect this country. And it's doing what we can to keep them out of harm's way. So on that note, as I said earlier, this is personal to all of us. And you're going to see on your table, we have little note cards. We do not. This is going on the fly. We do not have note cards, so never mind. But we really do want to continue to hear from you all why this is important to you. So as you're talking to my colleagues who are here in the room, as you're talking to Luke, as you're coming to our events, we really are built on our members. We want to make sure our messaging continues to meet you in the moment and that we are doing a good job of really representing what it means to you here in Utah. But enough from me. I'd like to actually now introduce two members of USGLC's coalition to the podium and hear from them what this is worth. It's Attorney General and State Secretary.
Thank you, Michelle. Ladies and gentlemen, how about another round of applause for Michelle Becker? She is a bright light in our world. I appreciate you so much and the work that you do. I am the Utah Attorney General. Good afternoon to our honored guests. I don't love the snow days growing up in California and Hawaii, but I do love the storms for one thing. It's easy to tell who else living in Utah grew up in California and Hawaii because so many of them are on the side of the road. You can see them pulled off. As a proud member of USGLC's Utah Advisory Committee and as someone who believes that promoting global development is central to demonstrating American values and advancing our interests around the world, it is an absolute honor to be here with all of you today. We're here today with Congressman Blake Moore to have a conversation about how America's leadership in the world, through smart and effective investments in development and diplomacy, advances our interests at home and abroad. In Utah, we understand this a little bit better than most. Today, America's investments around the world are more efficient and effective than ever before. And Utah's nonprofit and faith-based organizations are working tirelessly to make the world a better and safer place, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's necessary for our own prosperity. Strategic investments in areas such as technology, infrastructure, and the rule of law are critical to tackling global challenges like poverty, hunger, energy scarcity, disease, and human trafficking. In fact, when it comes to fighting modern-day slavery, Utah is viewed by many around the world as the tip of the spear, thanks to incredible work and support from Utah NGOs, military organizations and personnel, businesses, faith-based groups, academia, and government leaders. Now, how do I know this? Because I've received many thanks from world leaders as I've hosted them here or been in their countries, speaking to their parliaments, training lawyers and law enforcement, or working undercover with their task forces. And this is just one of many ways Utah leads out globally in deploying dollars, diplomacy, and diverse resources to such worthy causes. So to all of you exporting Utah's spirit of service and volunteerism, we thank you. And now, as I was the appetizer for this duo, let me introduce the entree of our group. Let me please introduce my esteemed colleague from the leadership of our Utah Senate and former president of Weber State University, my good friend, Majority Whip, Dr. Ann Milner. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Sean and I often are in similar places, speaking before similar groups, and it's a pleasure to be with him today. I'm here today, this afternoon, because there are many large and small businesses located in Utah that understand that local economies rise and fall with the economic currents of the world. When we think about most people buy American goods and services who do not live in America. And many of them live in the developing world where markets are growing the fastest. In fact, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were once recipients of foreign aid. 1 in 5 American jobs are tied to international trade, and 1/3 of all of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. are tied to our exports. Our global partnerships matter, and they matter around the globe, but they also matter at home. In the Senate, I can tell you, I work on the Economic Development and Workforce Services Committee. The private sector doesn't do this alone. We can't be competitive in the global marketplace without a partnership between business and government and universities working together to make things happen. That's why we rely on the critical strategic investments in diplomacy and development to help fight corruption, promote the rule of law, open new markets for our goods and services, which is key to our economic prosperity here at home. And that's what gives me great pleasure to be here today and to introduce this panel and Congressman Blake Moore. Now, I'd like to join me in welcoming this panel. This afternoon's panel will feature General Robert Neller. He's a retired U.S. Marine Corps general who served our country for more than 4 decades, including as the 37th Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. He served in combat missions around the world, from Somalia to Panama to Iraq, before retiring from the Marine Corps in 2019. Also joining the panel is Christina Brown, Corporate Affairs Manager at Chevron, right here in Utah. Prior to her current role, Christina served as the Communications Director for the California State Assembly before becoming the Deputy Communications Director for the California State Senate. We will also welcome back Michelle to the stage, who will moderate this discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce Congressman Blake Moore. He's a dedicated public servant who represents Utah's 1st District. Congressman Moore serves as the first ever Utah Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee, and along with his service on the Budget Committee, he is a strong advocate for Utah's businesses and defense community. He also serves as the co-chair of the Armed Forces in DAPO caucuses and is an important member of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, a critical forum to advance bipartisan solutions to today's toughest challenges. From his experience in business development in healthcare and financial services industries, to his time as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and now in Congress, he is an advocate for Utah's role in strengthening our nation's national security and economy, and knows firsthand why we must invest in all our tools of national power: development and diplomacy and defense. to keep America safe, secure, and prosperous. Congressman Moore, we're grateful you're joining us today and for looking forward to hearing your comments in helping us make our way through the global challenges that we all face. Thank you.
All right, let's get the record straight here. To be introduced by Senator Ann Milner with those kind comments is a little bit, I don't know how to really reconcile with it. It was a few years ago. I was respectful. Yeah, they were very respectful and almost too respectful. My mom worked for Senator Milner at Weber State. And when I was sending her an invitation to my wedding, my mom sat me down. I want to see that invitation. Nope, that is not addressed correctly. This is the most impressive professional you'll ever come across, and that invitation needs to be perfect. It needs to be spelled right. That's why I know it's always 2 L's. And anyway, so I've had the utmost respect for Senator Milner, and this should absolutely be flipped. I love this role. I love serving in this capacity, and I've got a lot of work to do. And so when I hear those laudatory words expressed, I always have a little bit of uncomfortable nature to that, but particularly when it comes from Senator Milner, who, like I said, has been somebody that over the last decade that I've very much looked up to, because I still am a kid who does exactly what his mom tells him to do, which usually doesn't get me in any trouble, which usually puts me on the right path. Let me briefly just continue on with the theme about making fun of the weather. It's lovely seeing that, I don't think this was the intent of all of our legislation. Speaker Brad Wilson, from Governor Cox to Senator Romney and I, we've all gotten through tons of legislation, and it snowed because of it. So we're going to fill up that Great Salt Lake, and we've got good legislation going, but I think it's time to maybe put an amendment on Governor Cox's request for prayer and maybe delay that request until October. And I was joking with Representative Lee that we're probably going to be praying to stop the flooding here soon. So it is something that we appreciate, and it's good for this community. Ben, since you brought it up, I do want to address, from our conversation, I can say that I've basically tried to adhere to every piece of advice that you gave me at that point. And partly reaching out to Ben, it was one of the younger representatives, 4 kids. I'm in the exact same situation. Our conversation was really about how to be a dad, how to be a husband in this crazy world. And so much of what you shared with me has helped me not do it perfectly, that's for sure, because Monday night I got the opportunity, Bruce Springsteen. I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. My brother actually convinced his wife for many, many years that Bruce was actually from Ogden, which I think is a really great tidbit. She believed it for many years. But I'm sitting there at the Boss concert, and she texts me a picture with my little 1-year-old who's about this tall, with vomit all over the back seat of the car, all in there. And she just said, "Enjoy the concert." And I literally was sending her a picture with me from the concert at that time, and I let the thing, I didn't even try to cancel the send, and I let the text go forward, and I said, "Wow, bad timing on my part, but it's awesome." So I'm still learning. I take your advice, but I'm definitely still learning. And another thing you said was, in that conversation, I vividly remember, local politics is so much better. Coming from being the Salt Lake County mayor to going to being a representative, local politics being so much better. There are so many in this room that really make things happen. There are so many mayors, there's so many commissioners, there's so many state legislators. I look to you and what you're doing, and to some degree, you make my job easy. When I have to prepare to speak, or to question Ambassador Tai, my team calls Miles. It says, what does World Trade Center want me to talk to the ambassador about with respect to trade policy? The more that I can continue to do that, and the more that other representatives across the country can look to their communities and identify what can I be doing to better, as a core part of that word, represent and be that voice. So we deal with a lot of issues across the board. There is so many tough decisions to make with respect to what we have to do within Congress, and we should all be doing a little bit more about what do some of the key experts, what are the people that are fully invested in this area? They've done the research, they know the reality. What did they want me to be doing, right? And I've tried to take that approach, and candidly, it's made my job easier, because when I have a question about X, Y, or Z, I can contact experts that are heavily versed in this area and try to promote that. So I just wanted to be here to thank you all. I know I'm the keynote. I get to be on this, and my name's on the door, and all that kind of fun stuff. But I know that the legislation that I build comes from my team. You could meet my legislative director, my chief of staff. I know that the reason people are getting passports is because Peter Jenks and Hannah McGuire are working so hard, and I know that we're highlighting all the amazing things that are going on with veterans and trying to memorialize their lives because of Anthony, right? So I have an amazing team, and I have an amazing team of Utah professionals and experts behind me trying to do the work that I'm doing. So I wanted to boil my speech down to three things, and once again, my team is so good. They've provided me with far too much information to do. Hopefully some of that context comes out when we do a discussion here in a moment, Michelle. But I wanted to just boil three big topics down and just try to share a little bit of context with those. And I won't go heavy into the details on all the bullet points that you could. But the absence of American leadership makes molehills become mountains. Right? And I want to think about that, and I'll provide just a few thoughts with respect to that. But when Lou Kramer says that we are the great hill, the great beacon, however you say it best, the shining city, like when we aren't that, when we don't show leadership, those molehills become mountains, and they become big problems that we have to deal with later. And the responsibility that we have as that shining city, as that global leader, we do end up dealing with them. And so what can we be doing now to get out ahead of some of these things? The second one is that government solutions require courage and focus. The courage part is, sometimes something that I've been faced with a lot, and I didn't expect some of that to take place. Happy to share a little bit more context with that. And then the key piece that I would actually spend a little more time on is that business and national security leaders, we need to be speaking the same language. Okay, so American leadership, getting out ahead of issues, having the courage, and then making sure that our business and our defense leaders are speaking the same language are huge. So one of the pivotal moments in my life, I remember I got to hear President Bush speak. This was probably 07-ish. And everything was going on with Iraq, there's always a hindsight to everything that we do, right? Every president can have that hindsight and looking back and seeing the things we could change. And I know that President Bush, who recently spoke at the event in D.C., was a great event to be able to hear from, always because he's so hilarious and very, very sarcastic. But he said, my father was shot down by the Japanese, and we just signed one of the best, trade relationships ever. Right? Thinking about that, his dad was almost killed by the Japanese, and now it's our strongest partner. So I look forward to a day and it's probably going to be a post-Putin day, but I look forward to a day that I can go. I've never been to Moscow, actually. I always did my work on the Asia side of the world, not the European side necessarily. I look forward to a day to being able to go to a free Ukraine and being able to visit Moscow. I won't. I think I'm sanctioned by some people at this point. I think in China too. I look forward to those opportunities, right? We have this history. I took my dad when I was living in Southeast Asia. I'll never forget. It was that same moment when I heard President Bush speak that my dad was sitting on the top of a little junk boat, overnight quasi-cruise thing in Ha Long Bay, Vietnam. And my dad was just up there shaking his head, and he just was like, I can't believe I'm here. I cannot believe I'm here. This was what I was so worried about. I did everything. This was the place that I feared coming to. And now I'm here, and this is the most amazing trip I've ever had in my life. Now, it's not all about vacations. It's not all about junk boat cruise tours in Halong Bay. What it's about is relationships and building a stronger America by embracing the fact that we have to find and promote and cultivate those relationships with foreign partners. And in the absence of that, we are weaker. So it's a reverse effect. Those are just two examples, and I could give several. Go across the board on decisions that are made. I think Syria is a bigger problem than we want to give it credit for, and we can look back and say, what could we have done differently in Syria, right? What are areas that we could have been stronger in some cases? Where could we have built better relationships? We will, you see what is taking place with China and the Belt and Road Initiative and their massive investments in infrastructure across the globe and in areas that are influenced simply by a little bit of attention, if you will. We're seeing it in Latin America right now. We're seeing it all throughout Africa. And these have impact, and they'll have impact on us. And then at the same time, look what we did with Huawei just a few years ago, right? What we should be doing with TikTok, we did with Huawei not just a few years ago. We embraced our foreign partners, other European allies, to make sure that Huawei didn't just sweep the nation and have an infrastructure embedded in all of these close allies that was being run from Beijing, right? And so we have examples, poor examples, we have good examples from Republican and from Democrat administrations across the board where we can look at and say strong American leadership. Ultimately, if we're doing it for nothing else, it benefits ourselves. So that's kind of the piece, and if we want to get into more of it, I'm happy to, but it's just so important to remind ourselves that when America shows strength, we have good outcomes. Now, this is the part of the talk that I could get into debt and deficit, and I've promised my team that I won't. It would be the rest of your afternoons, but it is an underpinning issue, right? We haven't planned for what we needed to plan for. We haven't been adults back in Washington over the last 20 years to say, what could we do to make sure that we're on a strong footing with respect to debt and deficit? Because when we're strong financially and economically, we can influence that going forward. That's all I'm going to say about it, unless you ask me or drill on it in the key piece. In my first campaign, I think that Mayor Shepherd will remember, as people are watching, another one of the candidates would always say, he always said two things. One was a swipe at me, which I loved, where he said, this isn't for on-the-job training, because I was new to the political world. I actually totally respect it and thought it was a great line. But Kerry Gibson would always say, there are no more easy solutions. There are no more easy answers back there. Part of it because of our debt. I'm done. But there is no more easy solutions. And that's what takes courage. We've seen that we get bogged down sometimes in the minutia when we've got to always be thinking about the big picture with respect to what American leadership means for the rest of the country. And this partly goes back into seeing what the future could hold if we're willing to support. We are making differences and making changes with how we treat and interact with Taiwan than we probably should have been doing for years prior, since after Crimea in Ukraine, right? And it's not us. It's not all us either. Right? We have this stated policy with Taiwan about strategic ambiguity. It baffles me, right? I'm somebody that wants to be more specific, more plain, but they're not going to buy more. We're willing to sell them more. We're willing to do more, and there's this strategic ambiguity that's ultimately going to be part of the issue that we have in a few years if President Xi continues down this path that he has promised that he will. And there should be every ounce of us to respect the fact that he's going to do what he's saying he's going to do. And think about the differences here. In Utah, and Senator, AG, if you can correct me on if I'm incorrect, if I'm wrong here, But what happened when Ukraine and the sanctions went down? Well, I think our liquor stores started to sell maybe a couple Russian vodka, less of that, when we did the economic sanctions. I don't think we were their biggest customer anyway, with respect to the vodka, right? 18 to 20% of what we import right now then would be from China. We try to do something similar that we did with Ukraine in the sanctions there. It's fundamentally different than trying to sanction China in the same way for them to invade Taiwan. And so I'm encouraged to see the engagement that we're having with Taiwan and what we're trying to do, but this is a looming issue, and America, we need to make sure we know what we're doing, when we're going to do it, and how we're going to go about doing it, and make sure that we as Congress can come on board to explain to doing that. I know I can speak for the Republican conference that we are getting the most accurate briefing. There's classified, and then whatever we can unclassified share as far as the direction we're going here. And so I'm encouraged in making Taiwan as prickly as possible, but this is not going to be apples to apples. Again, far different economic situation than we have with China than we do with Russia. And with that, I want to just highlight something that I know that the World Trade Center cares deeply about, is generalized system of preferences. And there'll be a handful of people in here that know it, but as you think about the concept behind this, it's called GSP. And this is what I spoke to Ambassador Tai about the other day. We all say, in fact, I said it in my first debate, as I had my notes from an old colleague of mine who I see sitting here today, when I asked him about China policy. The key we need to do is find a sustainable way to maybe move away and not wholly rely on China. GSP is the way we do that. That is the way we can encourage good relationships with developing nations to become trade partners. And we've seen success with this. Utah companies have taken advantage of this. And in doing this is a positive way that it's not a give or take. We still can encourage promote good trade practice, but also do our part to try to hold China accountable. And we're seeing the administration, Congress waffle on this and not necessarily know what to do, even though it's very popular among both parties. But the inaction, it could be potentially very dangerous. And so I've been doing what we could from my position on Ways and Means, which covers the trade jurisdiction, to push this as much as possible. I love that the Utah community is on board and helping me along the way in going about doing it. It goes to the last piece that I'll mention, and then I'll wrap up. I had a businessman who runs a very awesome Utah-based manufacturing business here come to me and say, I want to do what's right, but what is going on? Like, how can I navigate this going forward? And that is the fundamental issue, speaking particularly of China, where a lot of the trade goes on. The essence of his question is, if this goes belly up, like, my business is totally affected, and I don't necessarily know how to navigate it. So what can our business community and our defense community be doing to better promote that? And candidly, Utah is the best place for this. With such a high percentage of our GDP focused on defense-related work, I think it matters to us more than it probably does many other places, and I believe we can lead out on that, and I want to be someone that can help promote that. We have the good ideas here in Utah, and what can I be doing to help promote that among my colleagues, and so we can get on the same page. Even though I joke that not much was impacted with respect to Russia, but there's economic disruption there. We have hotels, we have restaurants, we have companies there. It's far worse in China, and we need to be doing our part to get out ahead of it. That's why the organization like World Trade Center is so good to be focusing on that, and I want to help continue to be a promoter of that. So again, I'm trying to bring some anecdotes to this. I look forward to chatting a little bit more, but to say nothing else, there are so many people as I'm looking around the room that have helped me and put me in the right frame of mind and focused our efforts to make sure that we're doing what needs to be accomplished. So thank you for that, and please continue to do so, and I promise that my team will work doubly hard to advance some of these initiatives as more tumult ahead, I'm sure. So thank you so much.
Congressman, thank you so much for those opening remarks. I have to say it again, we're just, on behalf of USGLC, and I know your constituents here in Utah, we're just so lucky to have you in a leadership position, not only in the state, but across the country. And I want to also now...
My wife knows that. She gets through some
well,
of
after
this-
your
those
story about
vomit.
Bruce Springsteen concert and the baby throwing up,
I don't deserve all that. Yeah, exactly.
you've got some definitely work to do. And we are really delighted today. We've had a little bit of a change in our program, and I just want to thank so much General Neller, who's been able to join us from the East Coast, who was waylaid over weather issues. And unfortunately, our panelist from Chevron has come down ill, and I am absolutely delighted that that means we're being joined by our good friend, Miles Hansen. Most of you already know Miles, but Miles is the president and CEO of World Trade Center Utah. Miles has just a wealth of global experience. We both served in the Trump and Pence administration, where Miles was at the National Security Council as Director for Gulf Affairs, and prior to that was at State Department, where he advised the Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs. And just really delighted to have you join this panel today to talk about these nexuses
Thanks, Michelle. And what Michelle is saying is that if you're the appetizer, and Senator Milner, you are the main course, I'm like the after-dinner snack. You didn't know you were going to eat, and then after you eat it, you hope you not to regret it after.
I thought he was going to say dessert.
Dessert. No, I'm not even good
He's not
enough
even
for
giving himself dessert.
That's right. But I'm happy to be here and fill in.
Well, thanks. Well, I want to start off this conversation by picking up on some of the threads, Congressman, you mentioned about national security, and then bring, of course, the general into this conversation. And in really thinking of your illustrative example of really this is avoiding having, molehills become mountains, right? And this idea of prevention. So we know right now we are really at a time of crisis around the globe. The latest estimates that I saw were it is expected that about 300 million people around the world are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. And global poverty is on the rise. And something I've spent about 20 years in international development, and as you were talking earlier about just sort of the role of family in life, kind of reminded me of my time as well overseas. And a parent who has a sick or a hungry child, it does not matter what country you're from, you will do anything for that child. And so what we have increasingly seen over the decades is this nexus between areas of deep poverty and humanitarian need and also conflict and crisis, right? Recognizing that those are drivers, unfortunately, of instability, of violent extremism. So I want to talk a little bit about national security, and I'll start with you, Congressman. You've spent a lot of time overseas. You bring a lot to this conversation, beginning back in, I believe, in your university days as a missionary, and throughout. And I'd love to hear from you sort of that on-the-ground experience when you were living in Southeast Asia, and sort of the role you were seeing of that, let's say, the more of the foreign policy side of the national security toolkit. And what were our diplomats? What were our development experts? What were they contributing to our national security?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just, a lot of folks in here were served missions as well. I was not heavily versed in diplomacy at that point, but it did help me learn Korean, which later helped me lead to a job in working in the intelligence service. So living in Southeast Asia, like the story about my dad, I would say if you were to just take a step back and think about the big picture of what we're trying to do, what USGLC is trying to do, what our organizations like USAID, State Department, like their overarching goal is to promote stability and try to get out ahead of conflicts. And we're not always successful at it. We can't continually always be the police organization for the entire world, but that is the goal of what we're trying to do. And let me take it completely off topic here, something different, but I think it totally applies. Is we have a immigration issue right now at our southern border, and you're seeing it come from a handful of countries. And if we look back and we sincerely look at the work that we've done in a place like Colombia, we have been able to make improvements to their community, and then ultimately it it doesn't bleed into more problems for us with a troubled immigration system right now. And so we've got good examples that have taken place, and I would say that that theme could be done, all throughout the globe. We often want to talk, and I even did earlier, about you can talk Ukraine, you can talk potential conflict with China, and those are good examples. But there are so many ways that our nation is supporting other areas that isn't an easy soundbite, but ultimately benefit us greatly. And I hope to always be able to bring that perspective to the conversation, when we talk about how we're going out and influencing other areas.
Well, and I think to your point, it's so important, right? Because if we're not showing those examples of how, for example, Plan Colombia, we have recouped more than 10 times our investment there and what our trade is, right? What the immigration looks like now. And that's part of it, right? It's the messaging and explaining to everyone how this matters. General Neller, obviously want to bring you into this conversation, and thank you, sir, for your decades of service to our country in the Marine Corps. I don't have to tell you this, we are at a really unique time when we're seeing, right now, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this is the largest land war we have seen on the European continent since World War II. We've talked already a little bit about, rising tensions between China and Taiwan, and what is that meaning for other allies in the region. And as I mentioned earlier, it is our military community and leaders like yourself who are really our most articulate messengers when we're talking about why this matters, why the soft tools approach matters. And so I want to hear from you in your decades of experience around the world. How have you seen those investments in our diplomacy and development helping keep our men and women out of harm's way and protecting our nation against these global threats, which increasingly we're feeling here at home?
Well, Michelle, thanks. I'd be the first to admit I grew up in Michigan, and I wouldn't have been on the side of the road, but I decided not to come out and drive through the snow. So I just I live in the great state independent Republic of Texas. I'm a transplant, so I'm learning to become a Texan, which, Congressman, maybe you can give me some advice on that. But and I'd also like to thank you for the courage you've shown and the votes you've taken. So your military is out there, our military, not mine, it's yours. The young men and women that serve, they come from the heartland. They come from towns and cities, and you should all be very proud of them. We need to encourage more of them to serve. And we also need to take a look at those that are not qualified, but that's another subject for another day. But clearly, your military is there to deter aggression of potential adversaries, to maintain and build partnerships and alliances, and if there is a fight, you expect us to win. So obviously we want to work with our partners, and we go to places, with all due respect to the greatest generation, normally there aren't wars in nice places like France. They're in lesser places that we seem to end up, and those are normally places where there is poverty, where there is authoritarian governments, where there is a repression of rights. And although I agree we can't fix everything, but sometimes we have to do what we have to do, and ideally as part of a coalition of willing partners or other agencies or organizations in the world. But there are ways that we can do things. I think the congressman said it, I think Michelle said it, it doesn't take much, particularly in our own backyard in this hemisphere. There's a lot we could do, and it wouldn't cost us a whole lot. Colombia was an investment, and it's turned out fairly well. I think we could make the same investment in other countries in this hemisphere, because if we don't, those other countries that we talk about all the time, they're already there, and they're operationalizing capital, and they're trying to make these countries dependent upon them. So their payday lending tactics are going to create debt and dependencies, and for a little bit of money and a little bit of effort. And I see that now more and more in the last few years. I've seen that with the current administration finally getting a little more active in the Southeast Asia, in Oceania, Micronesia, and in this hemisphere and in Africa. So it takes some money, it takes some time, it takes some effort. And if we do those things, I believe we will probably deter adversaries and probably reduce the potential for there being conflict.
General, in listening to you, I'm really taken with this idea of, when you look at, let's say, those other countries, right, it really is in some ways a battle for influence, right? Because it is about who's willing to invest, who's willing to go there. And I think that gets us really to a topic we've teased out a little bit already, but it is the economy, right? It is China. And what does it mean if America's not active on the global leadership stage? What does that mean for an opening for China? And if you look at today, and again, China right now is the top trading partner with 120 countries around the world, specifically in lower and middle income countries. And guess who they knocked out of that top spot in a lot of these continents? It's us, it's Americans, right? And in some ways, they're overspending or at least overpromising, and in ways where they're bringing their influence to the continent, but they're not necessarily bringing sustainability, right? And oftentimes, I think we call it what it is. It looks like predatory lending and loans, where it is, in fact, these country partners we have on the ground who aren't really coming out as winning in these, right? They're taking a lot of debt equity. We're just seeing a lot of countries at the end of the day, being sort of overcome by these financial challenges now with this trade partnership they can't overcome. And frankly, here at home, and Utah's a great example of what you're doing with world trade, with your economy. We depend on this, right? 95% of the population of the world lives outside of the United States. That's a lot of purchasing power, especially when we've got an economy built on that. So, Miles, I'm gonna start with you and bring you into this. And let's dig a little bit more into China. In some ways, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, right? We can't just pretend they don't exist and just cut them out of everything, right? They're still our largest, one of our largest trading partners, and that trade still looks like $650 billion a year. It's a lot of money. And so, you at the World Trade Center, I'd love for you to, first of all, talk to us about sort of what is your vision for American businesses? Because we kind of can't just pretend China doesn't exist, but we've got to figure out how to have a better, frankly, competition model with them. And I know you guys in 2021, and I'm so curious to hear about this, you actually hosted a China Challenge Summit. And it really was this idea, you're gonna bring the businesses in Utah, you're gonna bring the policymakers together, and you're really gonna talk about, okay, how do we compete with their investments, with their diplomatic presence, if you will. So would love to hear more for your thoughts on how do we approach this? What is sort of, hopefully, a winning strategy, and do you have a recipe for that?
Yeah. So let me pull out my crystal ball and figure out what the future holds with U.S.-China relations. No, but it's such an important issue. At World Trade Center Utah, we spend more time of everything that we do talking to companies about China and helping companies think through what their China strategy ought to be given the realities of where we are. And first, maybe I'll answer that thinking strategically and then finish up very tactically in terms of the advice we give businesses. But on a strategic level, the reality of the situation is that tensions are increasing dramatically. For the best overview and the best sense of how dire the situation is, how important the challenge is that we're facing, Google an article written by Matt Pottinger, who was former Deputy National Security Advisor when we were working in the Trump administration, led the China policy for 4 years, revered on both Democrats and Republicans as being one of the smartest people on China in the country. But Google an article he wrote, just from Matt Pottinger, President Xi Jinping is preparing for war. I have a visceral negative reaction to fear-mongering. I saw the title, I didn't know that Matt wrote it, and my initial reaction was like, come on, that again, like we don't need any fear-mongering. But then when you read the article, he's not pontificating. He is not speaking about what US policy is. He is simply somebody who devours in Mandarin everything that comes out of the Chinese Communist Party. And he takes that all day, every day. That's what he's sucking up. And he's just simply reporting on what China's policies are. What are Chinese leaders saying? What are they doing? As you read that article, that helps more than anything else awaken all of us, I hope, to the reality of the challenges we're facing. Now, do I want war? Absolutely not. I think we have to do everything in our national power to avoid that. In 2022, we reached an all-time high volume of trade with China, right? Which underscores the importance about how difficult and how challenging the situation is. But we don't get to choose what China does. We get to choose what the United States does. And so I'm so grateful for Congressman Moore for your leadership and being such a great advocate and representative of Utah interests in Congress. Always a text, a phone call, an email away. I can't overstate how much Congressman Moore is working to represent Utah in Congress and to win on the substance each and every day. And that gives me great confidence at the national level that we're going to figure things out and figure out how to address the challenge as it relates. As it relates to Utah, the thing that we tell Utah companies, many of whom are very dependent on trade with China, just like we are nationally, is that every company, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not cut and run. People talk about decoupling and 100% decoupling the economies, and that's just not realistic. But what every company has to do is to ask themselves kind of three questions. One, what is the risk profile of my business exposure in China? If I am a company that produces a software that runs semiconductor facilities, and I'm looking at it and going into China, my risk profile is very high. If I am selling food products that I produce somewhere in the world and I'm exporting that to China, risk profile relatively low. If I'm a manufacturer, if I'm 95% dependent on sourcing in China, no matter what industry you're in, your risk profile is very high. But if you're diversified, and say you're 20, 25, 30% in China, if you get cut out of that market one day due to no fault of your own, you're gonna be able to go and ramp up production in other areas. And it's gonna be a bad day, a bad week, and a bad month, but you're gonna be able to manage the business. So first off, what's that risk profile? Given your risk profile, what is the risk premium that you have to factor in to the business that you're doing in China? Again, high risk profile. If you're gonna do business in China, you're gonna have a high risk premium that you've got to factor into your business strategy as you try to figure out what you're going to do in China. If we think about what's best for all of our bottom lines as our household incomes, we wouldn't pay for fire insurance. But you pay for fire insurance because there's a risk there that you want to mitigate that risk. So you have to be thinking through as a business, yeah, maybe it's the cheapest to source in China, but when you factor in that risk premium, all of a sudden other places, Mexico for instance, may look more attractive and may make more sense from a business strategy perspective. And that brings us to the third thing that businesses have to do, and that's you have to come up with your risk mitigation strategy. What are you going to do to mitigate risk? China has shown time and time again that they will build up economic leverage and use that leverage to advance their political interests. Australian wine producers were by and large exporting to China and only China. The Australian government questioned China's early response to the pandemic, and as a result and as a consequence or a penalty, the Chinese government effectually blocked all exports of Australian wine to China. Norwegian salmon producers, again, China major export market. Norwegian government promotes or highlights human rights abuses in China. China doesn't like that, so they cut off exports of salmon to China. Wine and salmon would not be a sensitive technology, but for those industries, it was devastating. And so one day, due to no fault of our own, businesses here in the state or industries in the state may be cut out of the Chinese market. And so all of us have to be thinking very aggressively now, what are you going to do if that happens to your business? And how do you prepare now to build resilience in these strategies to, again, assess the risk and mitigate the risk? And again, you hope you don't have to, I hope I don't gotta have to call my insurance broker, say, hey, my house burned down, I need some help. But you better believe I'm paying my insurance premium, so if that happens, I've got a plan I can execute that's gonna help protect my family. And businesses in the state have to do that. And if we do that in aggregate across the state and across the country, then we'll be doing our part as people that are leading out at the subnational level in America's engagement to prepare ourselves for any eventuality. And again, we hope that the wise minds in Congress and in Washington can help navigate us through this challenge, but it's incumbent upon all of us to prepare for any scenario and then to build on that resilience as we do so. And that can give us confidence so we don't have to be dragged down into fear-mongering, but we can be confident and prepared for any situation that may arise in the coming years and decades.
Well, I think it's so important because you're really honing in on this idea that also global issues, where do they affect us locally?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought up this like level diplomacy, because I think so oftentimes we kind of say this is a Washington issue, right? But being based here, both of you in the States, you know, when inflation, I mean, we all know we have seen record numbers of inflation. Well, who does that hurt? Well, everyone living in their homes, you know, purchasing products, right? This is hitting everyone, you know, really at home in their pocketbooks where it is. And so I think it is really important to start really reframing when we're looking at these issues. You know, are we, one, looking at it as a return on investment, but two, de-risking? Yeah. We often don't think of our foreign investments, if you will, in that sense of, you know, and I love that example, I'm probably going to steal it, of really looking at it as an insurance policy. Mm-hmm. And Congressman Moore, I want to give you the last word on national security. One of the things that I found so interesting is there is literally an economic link between national security and the economy in Utah. And in fact, the defense-based jobs are really important and one of the strongest parts of your first district's economy. I was learning a little bit about Hill Air Force Base, which I understand is in your district. It contributes more than $3 billion annually to the state of Utah's budget and supports more than 30,000 jobs. To me, this was fascinating because it just shows that direct link, right, where actually now you are seeing this economic nexus between the defense industry and the economy. But would love to have you talked about this a little bit earlier, but would love to have any final thoughts you have on sort of this nexus and where you've in some ways seen our de-risking strategies and the work we're doing overseas really, you know, affecting us here at home.
Absolutely. And before Miles gives me one more compliment, I'm a product of also getting to come in a situation under two particular individuals. Burgess and I were freshmen together, but we both came in to two individuals that had been heavily working on this prior to me, particularly Congressman Chris Stewart, who he lives and breathes national security. Like everything he does is geared towards that. His committee assignments, everything related to his work. He was a B-1 fighter pilot, or B-1 pilot before for the Air Force. He shares Davis County with me, which is where Hill Air Force Base is. And John Curtis is, you know, served on foreign affairs, speaks Chinese, was in Taiwan. Like, you've got a delegation that cares deeply about this issue and is fully engaged on these matters. I would highlight two areas that we need to do better in this area. I talked a little bit about the communication, like all of those risk, you know, frameworks that you've put out. That was the example I had from the business leader that came to me, and he's trying to do that right now. And we need to make sure that our defense and our business communities are communicating better. I don't know the solution to how that all plays out, given the sensitive nature to some of it. But there is an improvement to be made. But as far as the nexus, one thing that is happening that I love to highlight but find ways to improve is, you know, decades ago, and it'd been sort of historical for the government to put out this, you know, put out a bid, develop some key technology for defense purposes. A big defense contract. And then what happens as it trickles down, all of a sudden we go, oh my goodness, there's all this commercial use for this. And then we created a lot of commercial use out of something that was otherwise a government contract for the defense world, and then we found a lot of good use out of it. We're flipping that on its head now. Given that we are such, you know, our nation has done such a strong job in producing technology, it's one of our big exports, we're trying to embrace that community better. There are a handful of very successful tech billionaires that have this patriotism, and they want to go and help our defense community in providing more efficient and, I would say, let's just call it an overall improvement on some of our weaponry or our defense mechanisms or drones. To that nature, we need to embrace that better. And there's an organization called DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, that tries to help the commercial side inject their knowledge, their expertise, their talent into the defense community better. And so it's flipped on its head, and sometimes government is just not ready for it. And so we don't have the right policies and regulation in place to sort of allow for it to happen smoother. And I'll tell you the biggest risk is these people that have been very successful that want to go and provide the right technology to help us lead into a next generation fighting force, right? We're always going to be having, we've got systems, weapon systems that were effective 30 years ago that aren't necessarily in the fight for the next gen, and we need to find ways to embrace them better. And there is organizations that are doing it, but they run into a lot of roadblocks. But one of the biggest concerns is they're going to get tired of fighting the government bureaucracy all the time, and they're just going to give up. And they're going to take their investments elsewhere, and they're going to try to do something else. And I think that's a huge, huge issue that we're not necessarily dealing with enough.
No, I agree, and I think you make such a good point of it. And it's also really looking to your point of kind of the maximum, output of and sustainability of what can we get? Can we see outside of this sort of myopic scope of this being so defense, right? Yeah. Because I think we oftentimes see that, right? It's like this is a very defense issue or this is a very commercial. And we try to do that USGLC all the time too, saying like, we don't have to always put everything in separate buckets. These are all intertwined and all can be used. General Neller, I want to come back to you on something you mentioned earlier, and this is on the idea of allies and partners. And I have to say, for better or worse, Russia's invasion of Ukraine really brought to the forefront of conversations, I'd like to say, the regular American citizen is having now about, NATO. And alliances and European partners and really sort of looking at what is the role of America in these organizations, And I think it's been a great opportunity really for our military leaders to talk about this is why it's so important, right? We don't and can't do things alone. And it is these strong relationships that we have with partners and allies that continue to not only prove to have, return on our stability, but also on our economy when we're talking about trade with our partners. So, General Neller, I know you had, during your storied history in the Marines, you had a chance actually where you worked at NATO on one of their military, in their strategic military command. And so I'd really like to hear from you, from your perspective, what are investments in strengthening America's partnerships and alliances? How do they reflect, I would almost say, the values of who we are as a country, but what in the end do they do to protect our own national security?
Well, Michelle, I appreciate the question. I was a NATO staff officer from 1994 to 97, and I'll be the first one to admit that I am an internationalist. I'm a realistic internationalist, but I'm an internationalist. So the Washington Treaty that was signed after World War II, we formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which Article 5 of which says an attack on one is an attack on all, has kept the peace in Europe since the end of World War II. Ukraine, whether you consider it part of Europe or not, is, as you said, the first significant conflict on the continent since then. And so for less than 1% of the defense budget, we've kept peace and economic prosperity and trade with Europe and the European Union and our traditional allies that we fought with during the war that are still our allies today. Nations have interests, not necessarily friends, but we do have allies. So I believe treaties are important. The second line of effort in the National Defense Strategy that came out in 2018 when General Mattis was Secretary Mattis is maintain and build partnerships and alliances. So there's no way the United States by itself is going to be able to, if we had to, address the multiple potential adversaries that exist, whether it be the PRC, whether it be Russia, whether it be North Korea, whether it be Iran or global terrorism. We've got to have our partners, and our partners have been there with us. They've been there with us everywhere we've been in every conflict since the end of World War II. So we need to keep ourselves focused on this. We need to be have our eyes wide open about our friends and allies. We're not always going to agree, but you have to make compromises sometimes. But we need these partnerships and we need these alliances, not just for stability and security in the world, but for to the growth of the global economy and what we value as liberal values and rights as a Western democracy.
Thank you, and I think it is so helpful to hear from your perspective, what that means, especially I think oftentimes when we think of our military and our strength and defense, right, we think of it being just the U.S., but going back to your point, I know you served in Iraq and other, theaters where we very much worked with the coalition, the Freedom Coalition, the Coalition of the Willing, and these other partners who are always there side by side, and what a difference that's made. We're nearing the end of our conversation. I'm going to shift to something that I think is really interesting, and two, would really like to get your thoughts since I have a captive audience and the microphone. And the one is, and Miles, I'm going to start with you. Talking about earlier, we can be really sort of, I think, myopic when we're talking about, these areas, sometimes America's global leadership. The one thing I don't think we talk about enough, and I would love to hear from you, is actually the linkages between our universities and our international students. And Utah is, in my research, the best case study of this, right? And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe last year you had more than 8,000 international students enrolled in Utah colleges and universities, and it contributed $237 million to the economy. You, through the World Trade Center, have now announced a new partnership with Utah Valley University to really help Utah's businesses kind of tap into this and actually have direct access to global business expertise and services. So can you just tease that out for us a little bit? Because we don't talk about it enough.
No, you're absolutely right. We don't talk about it enough. And it's interesting because I didn't appreciate before coming back to Utah the extent to which the vast majority of America's global engagement is happening at the state and local level. And we, at World Trade Center Utah, we focus a lot on trade and investment, but we also spend so much time working with our universities. And we did just recently open an office at Utah Valley University at their Business Resource Center. I see Baldemar Lago, who's from UVU. I'm sure others from UVU as well. Working with Weber State, University of Utah, Brigham Young University, Utah Tech, the university
I feel like that's a
formerly
scandal in the
known as
making.
Dixie.
Don't get into it.
Okay.
Just leave
And
that
Utah
one
State, but
alone.
we have these phenomenal universities that are attracting people from all around the world and then sending our students all around the world. I'm a product of a study abroad program. And so I grew up in Utah, no international experience, no international interest, get called, served a mission in Russia for 2 years. Okay. Came home and thought, well, that was enough international experience for me. I'm going to settle down and do business. And then through Brigham Young University and their student study abroad programs, applied to do an internship in Switzerland and ended up getting sent to Kyrgyzstan, which sent me to Tajikistan and Afghanistan and a career in the Foreign Service, and then back in Washington, D.C. And so none of that would have happened but for the phenomenal international engagement that is happening at Utah's universities. And so it's not only training the next generation, and preparing people to go out into the world, and just like Congressman Moore and many others have done. But then you mentioned the international students coming here to Utah. One, from a dollars and cents, we have a couple university presidents here from Weber State. Foreign students pay top dollar. It's an important source of revenue for our universities, and in some ways it subsidizes our education, our universities here in the state. And two, those students come here, they get a phenomenal education. Many of them will stay, and that's enhancing for our workforce, but those that go back to their homes then become ambassadors of the universities, of Utah, and of the United States. And I think about experiences I had while traveling in Iran and spending time in Afghanistan and meeting students who had been here in the United States. They are the best diplomats we could ever have. And that creates so much power, and that creates this soft power that creates these avenues of influence that General Noah is talking about, the importance of our alliances. If an alliance is simply transactional at the national level, it will be brittle. When an alliance is based off of shared understanding, robust people-to-people ties, cultural appreciation, even if it's not totally similar, then those alliances are very enduring, and they last generation after generation, and that creates a system that is friendly to our values, that I firmly believe America's global influence has an leavening effect on the rest of the world, and that promotes peace and prosperity not only for our country but for our partners and allies around the world. But it all is based off of a foundational experience of individuals from both countries building relationships, and then the cumulative effect of that is the strong strategic partnerships that are enduring and bring so much peace and prosperity to our country and people around the world. And the universities in the education system play such an important role in fostering and facilitating that.
So it's really sowing actual seeds of diplomacy
100%.
that we continue to see produce, decades. And I think your personal story is a great example of that, right? And just thinking of kind of where we would be at around the world if we had more of those opportunities for cultures, for different countries to begin to just understand people as just humans, right? Well, this is bringing us to the end of what has been truly just a really insightful conversation, and I want to thank our panelists again. In my opening remarks, I talked about our messaging where we're really going around the country and we're asking people, foreign aid, foreign assistance, what's it worth? And so I want to pose a final question to each of our panelists. I'm going to start with you, General Neller. In your own words, from your own experience, what has it been worth for us to invest in our diplomatic and development tools at home? From your own experience, what has this investment been worth?
Like many of the congressman and the other gentlemen, I've been to a lot of places, and from time to time you get a little bit of pushback from some of the people from other nations about what happens in the United States and all that. But when you get them aside and you say, come on, now tell me the truth. If you could go anywhere in the world and live any place you could, where would it be? And they'll lean in real close and they'll go, the United States. I go, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, we're not perfect. We can always do better. But, as was mentioned, American people are pretty good folks. We care about people. We're respectful of other cultures. We try to do the right thing. We're friendly. When foreign visitors visit us, they always remark to me about how kind everybody is across the nation from coast to coast. So I think it's important that we go out in the world, that we don't stay here in the lower 48 and then Alaska and Hawaii. We go out and we see the world, whether it be as a student or a missionary or as a tourist or a business person, and we engage with the local population, because then they can actually see what Americans are really like. I'll close with this. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote a salient piece in the 1830s about visiting the United States, and what he said was, America is good because America is great because America is good. When America ceases to be good, America will no longer be great. We are good, and we need to let the rest of the world see that.
It's powerful. Miles, I'm going to go to you next. What's it worth?
USGLC and the work that you're doing to promote the importance of America's engagement in the world has been important in the past. It's important today. It's going to be even more important as we move forward. I think as we all look out beyond the horizon, we are facing a world in which there's more conflict, more challenges, and yet less cooperation. And there's reason to be pessimistic, and it's challenging at times. Like, man, there are so many challenges out there. And yet in that environment, that is a time that we need to lean in to our global engagement. And earlier, Lou talked about, the light on the hill, and General Neller's talking about this light, this beacon. Our global engagement, the USGLC, is ensuring that we continue as a country, is our way of all of us engaged globally in different ways, of making our candlestick just a little bit taller so that light shines just a little bit brighter. And in a darkening world, that light's going to be more important than ever. And if we lean into it, then we can have great confidence that we're going to be able to shape it and manage these challenges, harness them in a way that's good for our national interests, which again is good for the world. I firmly believe that. If we do that, then the future can still be bright. But if we retreat and we build walls and we cut budgets and we turn and tear ourselves apart at home, then boy, fire insurance ain't going to cut it. Yeah. We're going to need a whole lot more than that in order to protect the peace and prosperity that we've enjoyed for so long. And so thank you for all the work that USGLC is doing to help promote this, our congressional delegation. It's funny, Luke is so good at any time there's a consequential vote, reaching out, I'm sure, to all of us about bugging our members of Congress. And every time I get those emails, I think, oh my goodness, I am so glad that we've got the delegation that we do, because I know I don't have to bug them because they are leading out in important ways. But that's the type of thing that it is an aberration nationally that we can't take for granted, and so we all need to lean in. And even though things here in Utah are better than in most places, as we move forward, Utah is going to have an opportunity to provide more national leadership, and we're seeing it with our congressional delegation, we're seeing it with our governor, and we're seeing it with our businesses. And we have to make sure that we're doing that, and whatever we can do to help support USGLC is something that's absolutely incumbent for all of us.
Well, and we do thank you. As I mentioned earlier, this coalition would not be anything without our members, and want to thank all of you, especially on our panel today, for your role. Congressman, the last word goes to you.
Okay, I think you've covered it. I was going to talk about if it's not us, I fear for who it is. My dad, we shared a burger when I was decided on taking a job that I couldn't talk about. And we were at hires, and he broke down and started to cry because he said, you know, with a volunteer service, you know, I have 4 boys and 1 daughter. None of my kids, which is no fault to any of your own, you've all done amazing things, and you're doing good things, and you're focused on all the right things, providing for your family and doing all that, and you've got good careers. But he said, none of you will have had a chance to serve in a very unique way, and I think that we all need to do it. And my service was always civilian. No stolen valor coming from me in any way, shape, or form to what our military personnel go through. But I did get that sense of serving the nation in a very, very unique way, that with this bigger perspective. And I know that the American principles are good to the core. We don't always get it right, and we've had bumps along the way and very tough things our nation has faced, and will continue to. But at the core, we have the right direction. When we invest in a country that's developing, we're doing it to help strengthen them. And I don't see that from other major powers out there in the world. And so if we fail to lead, the void that it creates is really scary to me. I always appreciated hearing from former Secretary and now current Congressman Ryan Zinke, to a very, very conservative crowd, spoke and stood up and said, if you poll this nation, 40% will blame Republicans and 40% will blame Democrats. And all the while, those other foreign powers out there that exist are just eating it up. They're eating it up because they know that if we have a weakness here and we have that constant strife among us, then they will be able to take advantage of it. And that sticks with me, and it goes to a lot of the decision making that we're doing. And so it's personal, but it gives us an opportunity to lead. And for a lame sports analogy, you always want the ball at the last minute. Yep. And I want the U.S. to be able to lead with the ideals that we're founded on, that will promote that throughout the world. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Congressman. Thank you, panel. And to close out today's discussion, I am delighted to invite my colleague Luke Wentz to come to the stage.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. Congressman Moore, you are an absolute star. Thank you so much for joining us. For those that don't know, my name is Luke Wentz. I'm the Deputy National Outreach Director here with the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. So I oversee all of our work in the Western U.S., but I fly Delta, so I say I'm in Salt Lake almost every week as it is. But it's always nice to be back. Really a pleasure to be with so many friends. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, Madam Majority Whip, Andy, Lou, Ben, McAdams, and all of our dear friends. Thank you for being with us. Specifically, General Neller, thank you. My very dear friend, Miles Hansen, who's amazing, isn't he? For goodness gracious, so glad to have such a great economic leader here in Utah.
So the after-dinner snack was okay. Hopefully not too much regret.
Thank you. And of course, to our very, very dear friend, Congressman Blake Moore. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Congressman Moore. I also, this is a little bit of, we traditionally don't do this, but I'd like Peter to stand up. Peter is his district director and just the most amazing guy in Utah. If you don't know Peter, thank you, Peter, for all you do. Congressman, your whole team is amazing, so congrats for that. Thanks for all your work. Look, I'm a former congressional staffer as well. I was once in Peter's shoes, and I promise you that he doesn't get a lot of good news. A lot of people call and are not particularly happy. So please, when you get a chance, if Congressman Moore or other members of the Utah delegation show support of American leadership, please reach out and say thank you. Write to your local newspaper, call into your local radio station, or talk about it with your family, your friends, within your community, because that's what really matters. And I know that Peter would appreciate getting a couple of nice thank you notes in the mail.
They only tell me about the nice ones anyway.
See, he doesn't even hear about the
nice
nice
nothing
ones.
but great calls today, Congressman. Everything's good out there.
I'm sure most of them are great, Congressman, but And if you're new to USGLC, you're going to be getting an email, even if you're not, from me after this program with photos from this event. And if you are new to USGLC, please do opt in so you can get some more information about what we do. And every time we're in Utah, you'll be invited to great events like this. So, Congressman, thank you very much. You're a dear friend and an extraordinary leader. Thank you to your team, to your to everybody that weathered the storm to be here today. It's truly because of people like you guys that makes America the greatest force for good in the world. So thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your afternoon and get home safe. Thank you.